Thank you for having me. Thank you for the great introduction. My name is Sascha. I'm the founder and CEO of Green Mining DAO. And as mentioned before, today it's about SDGs. You've probably heard of Bitcoin, mining. And one of the major topics is all around the energy. The energy consumption is bad and plays a big role. And that's partially what we're going to touch on today. But we're going a little bit deeper and looking at the sustainability, at the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. Now, Sascha, how can you say Bitcoin is a driver for the SDGs? Isn't Bitcoin evil? Isn't Bitcoin bad? Don't people do drug trafficking, human trafficking? Doesn't it consume a lot of energy? And so forth and so forth. Well, let's look at what Bitcoin really is. Right? Bitcoin is designed to be an alternative financial asset and an alternative financial system. And if you look on the left, you see what the Fiat system is like, and on the right, what Bitcoin is like. Limited supply for Bitcoin versus inflated supply for Fiat system. Backing by a computer network versus backing by a central bank, but nothing else than a promise instead of gold. Self-custody on Bitcoin side, a government dependency on the ownership side, on the Fiat side, and for transparency, you never really know how the Fiat system actually works and who's doing what and why they're doing it, while the Bitcoin protocol is 100% transparent, and even every transaction is transparent. And in regards of control, we all know, or who may have transacted money to another country, it is very hard to get money back into Germany because governments control the money flow through these banks, while in Bitcoin, the permanent transactions are allowing you to transact to wherever and to whomever you want. So looking at this, that's the difference between Bitcoin and Fiat. Now, what are the Sustainable Development Goals? They're goals set by the United Nations and are defined as the priority goals of our humanity. No poverty, no hunger, peace, reduced inequality, and so forth and so forth. And today, I want to try an experiment. It's the first time that I'm trying that, so thank you for listening, or like the masses that are screaming here today in the crowd. Woo! So let's look at some of these Sustainable Development Goals and see what Bitcoin's impact of them actually is. Number one, end poverty in all its forms everywhere. We look to the left and we see that the UN, the IMF, and the World Bank say inflation is one of the two main drivers for poverty. Since COVID started just until June 2022, the world printed 10 trillion additional monetary supply. Not much of that money ended up in each of our pockets, but it ended up in companies that were most likely not even to survive anyway. If we look at Bitcoin's supply, there is no inflation, no uncontrolled inflation. There's a fixed supply, a limited supply, and that means there's no uncontrolled inflation in Bitcoin, which eventually means less inflation, less poverty. Number two, end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. Well, Sascha, this must be made up. Well, no, not really. If you have inflation increase, you also see the food index price increase, and you also see the global food insecurity increase to almost 1 billion people over the last few years. Now we remember, with Bitcoin, there was no uncontrolled inflation, right? Wouldn't that mean that we wouldn't see such a global food insecurity increase? Maybe. Topic number three, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. Again, this is the IMF Pulse Poll survey. Oh no, that's actually Federal Reserve, sorry. That's the Federal Reserve. We can see on the left that actually about 50% of all Americans are very stressed about inflation, and more than 60% are very concerned about inflation. And now you get the drill, right? Well, with Bitcoin, there is no inflation, so people would be happier and healthier, no? Well, let's get to goal number four, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning and opportunities for all. If we look at the data from the IMF this time, we notice that in most countries of the world, less than 50% of the population have actually financial literacy, and men and women is even worse from a perspective. With Bitcoin, it's very interesting because Bitcoin is a financial asset that makes you accountable of every single step, of every single thing you do. Because if you lose your keys, you lose your value or your assets. So what we think and see is through this accountability that comes with Bitcoin, you actually start to dive into software. How does the code actually work? Do I really want to trust a mechanism and algorithm? I really dive into hardware. What is this, like, these machines that are doing Bitcoin mining? What is that infrastructure? We look at social effects. How does a 21 million capped financial asset actually work, and what does it do to our society? We look at our finances, and we look at macroeconomic effects. So there's many topics around Bitcoin. It's not just a protocol. It's not just a coin. But it's a movement with various other components that are important. Goal number 5, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. So this is, again, IMF, looking at how many women are actually participating actively in the banking system. And it's on average less than 40%. And specifically in countries in the Middle East and in other emerging markets where, due to a cultural impact, women are less put in front of banks or actually less allowed to do it, these numbers are frightening, in my opinion. Well, guess what? Bitcoin doesn't care. If you're a woman, a man, black, white, green, yellow, or whatever, you can at any time open a wallet, you can at any time do a transaction, and you can at any time participate in the code of Bitcoin. That's what I call equality. Goal number 5, ensure availability and sustainability, sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. If you look at the production of energy and look at natural gas, coal, nuclear, you see there's tens of thousands of cubic meters of water consumed for the production of energy for every single megawatt hour. And you see for wind and solar and hydro energy is not even on here, it's 0. Well, guess what? We continuously talk about energy consumption of Bitcoin mining, right? You see that the global Bitcoin mining community, which is the second thing on the left, the green one, is higher than 57% in consumption of renewable energy sources. And on the right, you see all other nations and their energy mix. Well, this is much lower than the whole Bitcoin mining community. So I think that we as an industry are actually one of the drivers in that renewable energy revolution. 7, ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. What is the biggest problem in build-out of grid? You have to get energy from where it's produced to where it's consumed. And the second bigger problem is you never really know, because it's a high investment, should you actually build the power production plant first, or should you build out the grid first? Well, guess what? With Bitcoin mining, you can actually build out a power plant, like a solar power plant, a wind farm, or a hydropower plant, and you can put up a mobile Bitcoin mining data center right next to it. You produce already return on invest, and then you start building out the grid. So decision made. And that's actually happening in Africa and other rural areas, and very successfully. Gridless enables cheap renewable energy in rural Kenya via Bitcoin mining is just one of many messages you can find online. Number 8, and I really need to hurry up because we only have 6 more minutes, promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth for all and productive employment and decent work for all. I talked a little bit about putting money into companies that actually would go bust anyway. This is a chart that shows you how many zombie companies are actually living globally. And we're talking about 10 to 15%, almost like throughout every single year over the last 15 years, that are highly over-leveraged and would most likely never actually come back to business. There's this latest report by the IMF that you can read that gives these numbers. I think that if there wasn't an unlimited supply of capital being provided to these firms, but only 21 million units of a financial asset, wouldn't one think twice to lend money to these zombie companies? I would. Goal number 9, build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. I wasn't innovative enough to actually think of a slide here. On the right, you see what comes through Bitcoin, blockchain, and the industry. We have seen innovation in social and gaming, in identity, in finance, in e-commerce, real estate, and so forth, you name it. It's not only Bitcoin, but this has actually exploded to various other industries. Number 10, reduce inequality within and among countries. We know that the richest 10% of the world actually own more than 70% of wealth, and we know that the poorest 50% own 2%. And that's the same not only in individuals, but also among countries. And the interesting thing is, the little the countries own is in US dollar or in euro. The dangerous thing here is what happens if money printer goes brrr, which is this chart that we see from the Fed, going from 2,000 billion US dollar in about 1970 all the way to above 20,000 billion in 2020. Well, what happens is the assets they own on their national reserve actually devalue, while the US, happily enough, prints more money. So what countries like, specifically in Africa and the global South is realizing is that Bitcoin is an alternative to the dependence on the United States and the US dollar. And actually, I don't know if this one is correct. I couldn't really do the research, but there was an article stating that the BRICS nations are thinking of taking Bitcoin as an alternative to the US dollar. That would be interesting. 11, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. The world population is probably going to live more and more in cities. Rural areas are going away. And with what I mentioned before, renewable energy, inclusive setup, and Bitcoin don't care, build out of grids, I think Bitcoin already plays a huge role in creating those inclusive, safe, and resilient and sustainable places. Goal number 12, ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. I don't know, who knows the high time frame to low time frame preference model? All right, so the high time preference basically says we're more interested in either consuming monetary assets like capital or deploy capital today rather than getting it in the future. But it also means that we rather do things that give us joy today and now rather than in the future. So what is this? We're talking about purchasing stuff that we don't actually need. We're talking about eating stuff that is not healthy for us, and it's about doing stuff that is not good for us. While the low time preference is something where I don't do something now to actually gain the reward in the future. Now, if you know a Bitcoiner, if you're a Bitcoiner yourself, you know that you need one thing very specifically, and that is time and resilience, because Bitcoin just doesn't go 10,000x in 1 week. But it is a long-term play. So I think people that are investing into Bitcoin and rather not spend it on the fancy-pantsy everything else are more in the low time frame preference. And if I look at it, it's about working out, it's about cooking yourself, it's about planting a tree, and not wasting the money you have into the stupid stuff, but rather actually saving it, because we all want to get more corn. Next one is take urgent action on combat climate change and its impact. We have less than 8 years to actually save this planet, if you believe it or not, I do. And I think that a sustainable financial system, equality that equals more peace, a stronger grid build-out to actually give energy to everyone, and also a less wasteful mindset that comes from the slide I said before, I think all of these play into actually taking rapid action or take urgent action. Goal number 14, conserve and sustainably use the ocean, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. This is what beaches look like around the world. And how you can tackle that is actually not on the bottom, regulate and disposal, but rather reuse, rethink, and redesign and conserve. And again, I think with Bitcoin fostering a mindset of a limited supply and not an endless amount of units that we can just waste and throw away, this problem would be tackled or at least addressed as well. 15, protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss. Whew. Hallelujah. This is what a gold mine looks like, right? You can see that from a satellite. This is what our Bitcoin mine looks like. I don't see it, do you? So this is Paraguay, middle of the jungle. We don't actually build these kind of holes. So that's I think, an impact Bitcoin has and Bitcoin mining has. 16, promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build active, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Alex Gladstein, I don't know who knows this guy. Is the Chief Strategy Officer of the Human Rights Foundation, and he says that Bitcoin, if Bitcoin was adopted as a global reserve currency, nation states would be less incentivized to actually spend money on war. And here's why: because we literally print money to then actually, we sell the bonds to open market and for a promise to pay it back in the future, and we use the income from these sales to pay for the wars. Goal number 17, strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnerships for sustainable development. And I think with more independent countries that we would get with Bitcoin, rather the US as a reserve currency, with less capital deployed into war and a mindset of limited supply but endless opportunities, therefore more mindful consumption, comes the less dependence on one single nation, and with that freedom, peace, and a sustainable future. So I think going from 1 to 17, we're touching on all of them, and I don't think Bitcoin is the one and only solution to all of them, but it definitely pays into every single one. And just to be clear, I'm not taking the data from my own dreams or sleep or whatever. All charts that you've seen come from these players. So the data is sourced from IMF, United Nations, the European Commission, and the Fed. So I'm not the one that actually is making it up. This data is out there. Just to remind you, look at it. It will be like a light bulb. And we think Bitcoin is the alternative to our current financial system and the only way forward if we want to manage our planet in a better way. I'm Sascha. We're from Green Mining DAO. And we're actually building sustainable Bitcoin mining infrastructure, and we're doing this as a community, as a group, not as a shitcoin, not as a scam, not as a bond, but actually every single person that is part of our community is an actual shareholder of a company that runs a sustainable Bitcoin mining facility that is supporting our planet. If you want to join, just speak to us, scan the QR code, or whatever you want. Thank you very much for listening. I hope I gave you some insights, and I wish you a wonderful conference.